Chapter 11. Miss Rose, are you certain it's fitting for you to be meeting with His Grace the Duke? You know how your parents would react were they to find out, not only about who he is, but about you meeting up with him. I know you've been arguing that it's a public place and no harm will come of it, but it don't seem so public when there's not a soul stirring at the odd hours you've been going there. I pray you, do not scold me, Mary. The situation is troublesome enough without you lecturing me. I do realize my parents would have apoplexy or disown me or some such. That is why we must ensure they never find out. I trust Alex, I mean the Duke, and I truly need someone I can trust right now. You know how Broderick is. He needs to be dealt with, and because of how I heard about it, I cannot trust my father to be reasonable. This is the only way for the moment. If you're certain, miss, was all Mary would allow with a slight sniff of disapproval. Rose grinned. Thank you, Mary. I would never be able to do it without you. You are the important factor in all of this. You always are. Now, be a dear and hurry along. I promised Elizabeth we would stop in today, and I really must return home to break my fast and look in on Mother. Oh, miss, I plumb forgot you hadn't eaten. You must be near to perishing. My stomach was too nervous this morning to be able to eat anything, but you are quite correct that now I am absolutely ravenous. I certainly hope the kitchen has not completely cleared away the breakfast dishes. If they have, miss, I will make sure you get something, have no fear. Thank you, Mary. Rose smiled her gratitude at her trusted maid just as they reached their stairs. Hello, Hartley. How are you on this fine day? She greeted the butler as he welcomed them home. You seem chipper this morning, Miss Rose. It does not strike me as being that fair today. No day really is in London, is it, Hartley? That is why one must ignore the day and decide that one's contentment is dependent on their state of mind. I have decided that today is fine, and I am happy with or without the sunshine. Very well, miss, Hartley replied with an indulgent smile. Is anyone else about yet today? Your father has already left to go about his business, and your mother has not yet left her rooms. Can I do anything to assist you, miss? I would dearly like to have something to eat. Do you know if breakfast has been cleared away as yet? I do not believe it has, miss. Thank you, Hartley. You just made my day. With a grin, Rose handed the rest of her pencils to a waiting maid and hurried to the dining room to assuage her hunger. A short while later, after eating, changing, and having her hair tidied by Mary, Rose made her way to her mother's room. After scratching on the door, she was admitted by Lady Smythe's personal maid. Good morning, Priscilla. How are you this morning? She asked kindly. I am fair to middling, miss. Thank you for asking. Is my mamma up and about yet? I was just about to do her hair, the maid answered as Lady Smythe called out, Priscilla, who are you dithering with? If that is the maid with my tray, bring it in. Good morning, mamma. It is me holding Priscilla up, I am sorry to admit. And I do not have your chocolate or toast. Would you like me to run down to the kitchens and get it for you? Good morning, Rosamond. No, that is quite all right. Priscilla has already rung, but it was kind of you to offer. Lady Smythe went through the motions of living her life, but her heart was clearly not in it, as she spoke with a melancholy, put-upon voice. I wanted to check with you if you needed me today. I was going to go visit briefly with Lady Elizabeth, but I could not remember if we had any plans. No, Rosamond, you go right ahead. It is nice that you have found a friend to help keep you occupied. You have so much more energy than I can muster, so it is good for you to have others your age about. Lady Smythe's tone made Rose feel as though this were an accusation rather than a compliment, and she struggled for a reply. Well, if you are certain you shan't miss me, then I will scamper over to Elizabeth's for a wee spell. Rose's flippant chatter made her mother sigh, which Rose chose to ignore as she continued. I will take Mary along with me, as I might make some other calls before I come home. I have some correspondence to take care of this afternoon, and then it will be time to get ready for the evening. Rose could see that her mother's attention was not fully engaged, but she persisted nonetheless. Do you not find it droll how we seem even busier than we are at home, and yet we get so little done with our days here in town? What is that, my dear? Lady Smythe asked distractedly. Not of import, mamma. I shall wish you a good day, and I will see you this evening. With that, Rose gave up trying to engage her mother in conversation, and made good her escape with a faint sigh of her own. It was a tragedy that she had, in essence, lost her mother at the same time as losing her brother. Returning to her room, she collected her own maid. "Come along, Mary. I am fairly certain I shall have need of you." "Very well, miss," the maid answered with a grin. "Are we going spying again?" she asked, with a skip in her step and her voice hushed. Rose had to giggle over the other woman's enthusiasm and attitude, which was so different from her own. "Most likely," she answered, annoyingly vague. "Will you at least promise to tell me if you find out anything that could be of use to us?" Mary asked, not bothering to keep the plaintive tone from her voice. "That is a promise I can keep," Rose answered with conviction. "I always find it useful to discuss everything with you. You have a good head on your shoulders, and I know you will not run and tattle." "Of course not, miss." The two hurried along and once more found themselves in front of Elizabeth's parents' lovely townhouse. Just before they climbed the stairs, Rose thought to tell Mary, "I have no certain idea how long we shall be here. I am hoping to not have to tell Elizabeth everything about my meeting with the Duke. I think it is in her best interest to remain ignorant of the details. I hope my play-acting skills are up to snuff, as I would hate to harm the friendship over this nonsense." Mary gave her mistress's arm a squeeze of reassurance. "I know you have your reservations about your involvement with these shenanigans, but your skills are still sharp, miss, and you are actually good at this kind of thing, which is not what one would expect of a well-born chit like yourself." The two conspirators shared a grin as they climbed the stairs. Mary went off to join the servants below stairs as the butler went to announce Rose. "The Honourable Rosamond Smythe to see you, my lady," he intoned properly. "Thank you, Frances. Please show her in," Elizabeth replied, keeping her excitement in check. Once the door was closed behind her guest, Elizabeth bounded up from her place on the settee. "I have been pacing a trail in the rug all morning, as I have been running to check the window every few moments. Did you see him? Was your meeting a success? Do we have a plan to proceed with?" Rose grinned over her friend's words. "I am so sorry for keeping you on tenterhooks. I was so nervous this morning that I could not eat before my arranged meeting, so I had to go straight home afterward in order to not faint on your front stairs upon my arrival." "You would not have been the first to do so," Elizabeth dismissed with a wave of her hand. Rose laughed. "I would not think Frances would be so accepting of that idea." "Well, now that you are finally here, please hurry and sit down and tell me all about it. Was the Duke able to shed any light on the matter? Did you tell him what we found out? Did you make a further plan?" Rose could not help laughing again. "Slow down, my lady, I pray you. Unfortunately, I do not have much solid information to give you. As far as Wrentham could find out from his solicitors and his man of affairs, there is nothing that either Austen or Broderick have against him. So on the surface it seems as though it is as Lady Anne said. He is just a prime catch for various reasons, and they set their sights on him." Rose could see the disappointment clearly etched on her friend's face. "So there is nothing further for us to do?" she asked, her tone plaintive. "I did not say that. I passed along all that we found out from Lady Anne, and Wrentham is determined to be vigilant. It saddens me a trifle, because Lady Anne really does seem to be a charming young woman who is merely misguided. I cannot agree with her father's idea. It seems to me that it is a recipe for a disaster of a marriage. You would not think any father would wish that for his daughter." Now Elizabeth looked pensive about the matter. "So, what can we do?" "We can be vigilant over the next weeks while out and about. I still cannot feel easy in my heart that Broderick is not up to something. It strikes a strange chord that he would be scheming with someone to entrap a husband for that someone's daughter. Wrentham pointed out that if it is not a love match on her side, they might just set their sights elsewhere. I cannot think this will lead to a happy life for Lady Anne. I propose that we should make an effort to dissuade her from her plans. She should set about getting to know some nice gentlemen, and hope one of them makes her an offer that she can be happy with." Elizabeth nodded her agreement. "It may not be as exciting as sneaking around to find out some information, but it is a sound course of action. And do you think we should keep an eye out for the Duke, in case we need to defend his honour?" Now Rose could feel her face shifting into a sceptical expression. "Do you think that would be possible?" Elizabeth laughed. "I was jesting you, ninny, although, now that I think on it, I do believe the idea has merit. It would keep him from the parson's mousetrap. Eventually he has to marry someone, but I can tell that your old friendship is still important to you, so I would think you would at least wish it to be a happy union." "You are absolutely correct on that score. I was just wondering how we could defend him." "By keeping an eye out for scheming hussies who are trying to entrap him," Elizabeth stated, as though Rose had lost her mind. This led to great hilarity between the two girls, and the subject was slowly changed to other matters. After a short time, Rose stood to take her leave. "Thank you for being such a great sport on this matter, my dear lady. Your help was invaluable. I certainly could not have done it without you." Elizabeth shrugged, dismissing Rose's compliment. "I barely did anything. I am absolutely certain you could have done it on your own. I merely sped up the process. I shall be sure to keep my eyes and ears open for anything pertinent tonight. We are going to the theatre, so there might not be too much to find out there, but there is always lots of gossip floating around at the intermission." Her eyes glinted with excitement. "I have always enjoyed the gossiping because I love to be up to date on the very latest on dit, but now it takes on an entirely new meaning when there could be actual useful information in it." Rose laughed once more. "You are a dear. I shall see you soon. We are going to a ball this evening that is being held by one of my father's ambassador friends. It shall be anything but dull, although I cannot quite say that I am looking forward to it." The two girls parted from one another on the best of terms, and Rose left, collecting Mary on her way out the door. "Did you manage to extricate yourself, miss?" Mary asked, as soon as they were out of earshot of the house. Rose giggled at the maid's terminology. "I did at that, Mary. Elizabeth is a dear and not at all the suspicious sort. She has no reason to think there would be anything more sinister than a young lady determined to make a good match. No doubt their scheme is not even all that original. We agreed that we should still keep our eyes and ears open for any mention of Broderick and his activities, as well as trying to steer Lady Anne into a more honourable method of making her match." "That was well done of you, miss," Mary congratulated. "Where are we off to now? This is not the way home." "We are going to stop in and see if Lady Yorkley is at home to visit us. If she does not have anyone else there, I am going to try to find out if she knows anything of use about Broderick. The fateful night of the musicale, she seemed to indicate to me that she had her own reasons for distrusting the man, and it felt as though she were warning me away from him." "Oh, miss, this is so exciting!" The maid almost squealed before sobering to add, "But you must have a care for yourself, miss. I fear this could end up being an unsafe situation for your person or your reputation. I know this is important and all, but shouldn't you be keeping in mind that you are here in town in search of a husband for yourself?" "Do not fret, Mary. I will have a care. Have no fear. Besides, having you along will help to preserve my reputation in whatever situation I might find myself." Rose sighed before continuing. "As to my search for a husband, that is another matter altogether. I know it will need to be done eventually, but I do not think I am in dire need as of yet. Surely my little brother is not about to marry any time soon, so I shan't be the spinster aunt before at least a few years have passed." "I don't mean you any insult, miss, but you ain't getting any younger." "Mayhap not, but I am quite certain that at 20 summers I am not yet nearing my dotage," Rose huffed. "True, miss, but I was trying to say that you should at least keep it in mind." "I know, Mary, you are quite correct, and I promise you that I shall give it some thought at my earliest convenience. In fact, you could help me, if you so choose." "However could I do that, Miss Rose?" the maid asked, clearly intrigued at the thought. "You know me better than anyone. You could help me decide what I should consider important traits in my future husband. The rest of my life is a rather long time to live with someone, so I would hate to make a bad choice. My parents will, of course, ensure that he is well enough established to properly support me, so that is not what I wish to concern myself with. I want to look for a man I can respect, and with whom I will enjoy spending time. So many of the gentlemen I've met thus far make me think that a few weeks spent in their company would bore me to tears, never mind the next several decades." Mary was looking at her mistress with wide, eager eyes. "I will put my mind to it immediately, miss." "Thank you, Mary." Rose smiled her appreciation. She congratulated herself on her skilful change of the subject, which also would help her tackle a tricky task that was necessary but intimidating. "I look forward to hearing your insights." The young maid barely acknowledged her mistress's comment, so engrossed was she in her own thoughts, her mind engaged in the important task. Rose had a genuine smile of amusement still creasing her face as the door to Lady Yorkley's home was opened by an attentive footman. He could not help his answering smile at the pretty young woman on the doorstep. "Good afternoon. I was wondering if Lady Yorkley is at home to visit us today," Rose asked politely. "May I tell her who is calling?" the footman asked formally. "The Honourable Rosamond Smythe." The footman widened the door for her to step into the foyer. "Would you care to have a seat here while I check with her ladyship?" "Thank you," Rose replied simply. A moment later, the butler came to collect her. "Her ladyship will be happy to see you. Might I take your wrap for you? Your maid could either wait here for you or go to the kitchens if you think you are to be a while." "Thank you." Rose turned to Mary to allow her to choose. "It is up to you, Mary. I might be a while. If you would like, you could make yourself comfortable in the kitchens." "Thank you, miss. I've a lot to think on. If it's all the same to everyone, I'll just sit myself right down here and ponder while you are visiting." Rose grinned and left her to it, following the butler to a lovely, welcoming receiving room. As he opened the door, Rose could see that it was decorated in the warmest shades of cream and ivory, and while it passed through her mind that it must be terribly difficult to keep clean, she did find it extraordinarily attractive. "Welcome, Miss Rose. It was such a pleasant surprise to hear that you were asking to see me." "I hope I am not disturbing you, my lady." "Not at all. I was actually just wishing that I had arranged something to amuse me today, and then I heard the knocker and was hoping it was somebody interesting. To my delight, it was you." Rose could feel a slight blush of delight rising in her cheeks over the older woman's pleasant welcome. "That is so kind of you to say, my lady," she began with deference. "Oh, do not be so starchy with me, young miss. I am determined that we are to be friends. Now, come and sit down, and let me ring for some tea so that we can be comfortable." Rose did as she was bidden, and perched delicately on the settee, fearful because it looked too fragile to be useful. Thankfully, its appearance was deceptive, and it turned out to be remarkably comfortable. She soon settled in for her visit. The two ladies exchanged idle chit-chat about the weather and what amusements they had attended the evening before, while they waited for the tea-trolley to be brought in. Once the housekeeper had brought it in and served her mistress and guest, and then bustled from the room, the Countess sat back comfortably with her teacup and eyed her guest carefully. "Now, Miss Rosamond Smythe, what brings you to my parlour on this fine fall day?" "Well, my lady, you did mention at your musicale that I was welcome to return at any time," Rose began, a little flustered. "Indeed I did, and I am delighted that you have acted on that sincere invitation. But it strikes me that there must be a reason, as it has been about a week since I uttered it. If it was merely to cultivate our developing friendship, I would think you would have turned up sooner." Seeing that her guest was becoming even more flustered by her words, the Countess hurried to add, "I am not complaining or censuring you, my dear girl. I am merely stating the facts as I see them. I am delighted that you have finally turned up at my door. I am merely curious what has prompted it." "My dear Lady Yorkley, since you were so kind as to invite me to visit, I was looking forward to speaking with you further. I apologize profusely that I did not come a couple of days ago, as you invited, for you're at home." Lady Yorkley waved away her apology, so Rose promptly continued. "But you are correct that there has been something that has prompted the timing. It is a rather delicate subject, and I hesitate to impose upon you." "Please, my dear Miss Rose, I welcome your imposition. Or, rather, it is no imposition at all. I am ready to be of service." Rose now felt a touch more relaxed over the Countess's droll words, and so, smiling, she launched into a tale, very nearly telling the truth. At your lovely musicale, I had the dubious pleasure of becoming reintroduced to Sir Jason Broderick. I have taken the gentleman in dislike, and did not relish cultivating the acquaintance. Unfortunately, my mother has decided that she thinks he might be a fine catch for me, that as a baron's daughter I should not think to look too highly for a mate, and that a knight might make me an excellent husband. Lady Yorkley refrained from commenting at this point, and Rose continued her explanation. Now, do not get me wrong, my lady. I am not opposed to a knight. I am not overly concerned with a gentleman's status, or trying to improve my own through my marriage. I am perfectly content to be a miss or mistress. The trouble is with Sir Broderick himself. He strikes me as being a rather repellent man, but I do not have any facts to back this up in an argument with my mother. Since you, yourself, warned me away from him at your musicale, I thought that perhaps you could share something useful with me. The Countess had continued to look at Rose steadily throughout this speech, holding her own counsel and not betraying much of her thoughts by even the twitch of an eyebrow. Rose was admiring her ability to keep herself contained, but then was distracted by the lady's words. "I mean no offence, my dear, but is your mother daft?" Rose burst into raucous laughter. After a moment she was able to control her mirth. Wiping the tears that had escaped during her hilarity, Rose finally was able to reply, "My lady, I have on occasion wondered that myself, but no, I do not believe she has lost her wits. She is merely of a different mind than I am." "But, my dear, this is far more serious than just a matter of taste. I can, if I make a concerted effort to be unbiased, see that some might consider Sir Broderick to be handsome, but the man is a snake under his skin. Clearly your mother has not taken the time to even have a conversation with the man, or she would have disabused herself of the notion of marrying you off to him. Not that he would want you." At Rose's faint gasp over this surprising statement, the Countess finally found her smile. "I can assure you, I did not just insult you. The man has no taste for ladies with any thoughts of their own in their head. To be honest, I strongly doubt that he is in search of a wife for himself, but from what I have observed, the only ladies he ever dances with are very fresh from the schoolroom, with very large dowries to recommend them." "You have partially set my mind at ease in that case, my lady. I have found reason to be happy that I am becoming a trifle long in the tooth." "You are nowhere near being on the shelf, so do not be a ninny," Lady Yorkley countered, with a wry twist to her lips. "But if my mother insists that I set my cap at the man, do you know anything that I could use to dissuade her?" "You could always just be very unskilled at cap-setting," the Countess suggested with a twinkle in her eye. "But in all seriousness, Miss Rose, there are a few things. Is your mother in the habit of gossiping?" "Not overmuch," Rose replied, puzzled. "The reason I ask is because some of the things I am about to tell you I would not want to be bandied about town. Aside from my mother's questionable taste, I do believe her discretion can be trusted if she is asked to keep a confidence." "Very well, then, I will tell you a few things. I do trust your discretion. I quite took a liking to you when we were introduced. You may decide for yourself what you tell your mother after we are finished with our visit." "Thank you, my lady. You have no idea how much I appreciate your help." "Think nothing of it, my dear. Would you care for some more tea?" Rose had prepared herself for the Countess to launch into a tale of the knight's depravities, and was thus surprised by the prosaic offer of tea. She allowed a nervous giggle to escape her lips. "Thank you, my lady. That might be a good idea." "Tea is always a good idea, my dear," the older woman stated with conviction. "Now, where should I begin? There are actually many things to tell you. Some I am not certain are suitable for a young girl's ears. I will be a little vague on some of those details, I am afraid. Your mother will appreciate that, I am sure." Rose was still puzzled, and wished fervently she would just get on with it. The suspense was making her feel edgy. The Countess dithered for a couple more minutes, fussing with the teapot and getting herself settled comfortably once more in her seat. Finally, she launched into speech. Sir Jason Broderick should not be trusted by anyone, in my estimation. Young girls are not safe from him, because he is rumoured to have ruined a couple young women of good families and then refused to marry them. Not that anyone would wish their daughters married to him, as he also has a violent temper and has been known to express his anger upon his servants and animals, so I would not put it past him to be a wife-beater. So, to get your mother to smarten up about the highly unacceptable night, you shall just have to tell her about the rumours, and I am quite convinced she shall set her sights elsewhere." Rose struggled to contain her disappointment. She was absolutely certain that Broderick and Austen's schemes involving Wrentham had nothing to do with the sullied reputations of unsuspecting debutantes. She had so wished that Lady Yorkley was going to be of help, but she could not divulge her involvement with the Duke, so all she could do was smile and nod as sincerely as she could muster. "Thank you so much, my dear Lady Yorkley. I am not entirely certain I know what you mean, but no doubt you are correct in surmising that it will be sufficient to get my mother to change her mind on considering a possible match between us." Rose was quite proud of how that had come out. She wondered briefly if she should rise to take her leave. She wasn't left wondering for long, as Lady Yorkley began to speak once more. "I would not normally discuss this next bit with a regular debutante. However, you seem to be a wise young woman, and since your father is a diplomat, I would expect you should have a little more knowledge of the ways of the world than some." Rose felt as though she had frozen in place, wondering how close to the truth the Countess was about to get. As she was looking expectantly at her, Rose forced the corners of her mouth to lift into what she hoped looked like a close approximation of a smile, and nodded her head, praying she did not look like a simpleton. It must have passed muster, as Lady Yorkley continued. "I believe some of the reason for your late debut is because you and your mother accompanied your father to Vienna for his politics." Lady Yorkley again looked at her closely, so Rose hastened to reply. "That is correct, my lady. It was a lovely time. I do not regret going with him for a minute, even though it means I am rather older than the other young ladies making their curtsy to society. Youth is not necessarily the asset everyone purports it to be, my dear. You are absolutely perfect the way you are, and shall make a brilliant match. I am certain of it." Now Rose's smile was much more genuine as she appreciated the lady's words. "Thank you for that kindness, my lady." "I am not being kind. I am merely speaking the truth. Now let me get on with my tale. Your maid will be nodding off in the foyer." Rose smiled, but did not interrupt, as she was now on tenterhooks to hear the rest that Lady Yorkley had to say. "Did you meet that scoundrel, Talleyrand, while you were in Vienna?" At Rose's nod, she continued. "His argument is that he always has France's interests at heart, and one cannot fault him for doing what he considers his patriotic duty, I suppose. But he is just so conniving and crooked while he is doing it. Broderick is a close associate of his. While one can excuse Talleyrand by considering his motivations, Broderick is another matter altogether. His motivations are always what is best for Broderick, not anyone else, and certainly not the nation. It concerns me to see him actively running about amongst the ton once more. I fear what he might be getting up to. You see, he is a terribly smart man, and plays upon other people's weaknesses. For example, Prinny has a weakness for anything to do with bonny Prince Charlie, of the Stuart dynasty. This can be exploited, and I have heard Broderick has been making attempts to do so. As well, his relationship with Talleyrand is highly suspicious. They should be on opposite sides, as Talleyrand is trying to dispute with some of England's claims for territory. These were settled to a certain extent in Vienna, but I have heard that those boundaries are currently being disputed still." Rose gazed at her hostess, feeling rather awed. She had no reply for the lady's words, but knew there was quite likely a high level of truth in them. She had a lot of information to take to Wrentham at their next meeting, but she was unsure if he would be in a position to help her with it. Rose wondered if she should confide in the Countess about their situation, but she resolved to ask the Duke about it first. Since he was her primary co-conspirator, she owed him her primary loyalty at the moment. But her utmost concern lay with finding out what Broderick was up to, and if he was trying to harm their country. If he was, all other allegiances would have to take second place to making sure he was stopped. Realizing she was dithering and that something needed to be said, Rose remembered that her pretense for speaking of these things with the Countess was her mother's strange words. So she marshalled her thoughts and came up with something to say. She only hoped it made sense. "My lady, I so appreciate your confidences. You are quite correct. As a diplomat's daughter, I am quite well aware of the ramifications of what you have just told me. I will not betray your confidences to my mother, although I do trust her discretion, but I do not think it will be necessary. These things just give me added incentive to ensure my mother's ideas do not come to fruition." "That is very well, my dear girl." As Rose stood to take her leave, the Countess quickly spoke up. "Oh, my dear, do not say you have to go as yet. We have not had any pleasant conversation. I know you came here with the express purpose of learning how to avoid the night and all that, but surely you could stay and visit a wee bit longer." Rose was gratified by the older woman's invitation and sank back down onto the settee. Glancing around at the well-appointed receiving room, she said the first thing that popped into her head. "I absolutely adore the decor in this room. Did you have it done recently, my lady? I wish my parents would consent to make some changes at our home, but they will not even consider the idea." Lady Yorkley smiled widely at Rose's compliment. "Why, thank you so much for your kind words, my dear. We had this room changed before the season last year. I agree with you that sometimes a freshened room is just the thing. I find it helped change my perspective completely." "My family could certainly use that," Rose offered in a low tone. "Ever since my brother died, the entire family has become frozen. My father is going through the motions of his work, of course, but coming to London for the little season is the first original thought my mother has had. I was so hoping it was an indication that things were about to change, but sadly I found my hopes dashed." "Oh, my dear girl, I am so sorry. I had heard about your loss, but as we were not acquainted at the time, I did not express my condolences. It must be so hard for your parents to lose their firstborn." "It is. I am sure it is wholly unnatural for a parent to be predeceased by their child, but their lives are not over. I fervently wish my parents could get out of the doldrums they have sunken into. They have 2 other children that need their attention, and who are very much alive." "Your mother seems to be attentive, at least to a certain degree. She is chaperoning you about town for the season." The Countess was trying to be kindly reasonable. "Mayhap, but keep in mind the original purpose of my visit. She did suggest that Sir Jason Broderick would be a good match for me," came Rose's dry reply. Lady Yorkley could not suppress her grin. "That cannot be argued with. It does make one wonder where her thoughts are." The Countess paused for a moment, but then continued in an earnest tone. "I know we are still newly acquainted, and I would never presume to take the place of your mother," she began, while Rose burst in. "Besides the fact that you are not nearly old enough to have the role naturally." "You are too kind, my dear, but as I was saying, I would be happy to be somewhat of a surrogate for you in these coming weeks. A young lady's debut can be a perilous, confusing time if she does not have sound advisers. I beg you, please feel free to stop in at any time to discuss any issue you might care to have an experienced perspective upon." "That is such a kind offer, my lady, and I promise you I shall take you up on it. I so appreciate your condescension, but I fear that I shall not be able to reciprocate in any way to demonstrate my deep appreciation." "No thanks are necessary, my dear. Lord Yorkley and I were not blessed with any daughters, and our sons are now at Eton. I am sadly bereft, and while I enjoy accompanying my husband to town when he wants to take his seat in the house, I would dearly love to be occupied in a more meaningful manner. If I could in some way smooth the way for you, I would feel as though I had a role to play. You would, in fact, be doing me a favour, rather than the other way around." Rose laughed at the Countess's droll words. "Now you are truly being too kind, but I shall accept your offer nonetheless. You must be sure to tell me if I transgress or overstep the bounds of your offer, though, my lady." "Very well, we have a deal," the Countess declared before she fixed shrewd eyes upon her guest. "Now, perhaps once we have become better acquainted, you will find your way clear to tell me the real reason why you are asking about Sir Broderick?" Despite her best efforts, Rose was quite certain that her surprise and chagrin were clearly displayed upon her expressive face. She tried to brazen it out, but did not want to lie to her new friend. "My mother really did express the opinion that he would be a good choice for me." "I did not think you were lying, my dear. I merely am of the opinion that you would have been well able to come up with reasonable arguments on your own. Or, rather, you would have just ignored your mother's ridiculous suggestion." At seeing Rose's discomfort, the Countess hastened to add, "I pray you, do not trouble yourself over it, my dear gal. That is why I said that I hope in the future you will confide in me. I do not expect it at this time, and I do not mind telling you what I can, even without full disclosure." Rose grinned at the Countess. "Thank you, my lady. I promise you that I will. And now I really should be on my way." As Rose took her leave and collected her maid, the Countess accompanied her to the foyer, chattering about social niceties and arranging a date for them to take tea the next time. Walking down the front steps of the Yorkleys' elegantly attractive home, Rose could feel Mary's inquisitive eyes burning into her back. She grinned, as she could feel the maid's impatience. She was impressed that the other young woman managed to hold her tongue until they reached the nearest street corner. "Well, miss, how did it go?" she demanded with impatient curiosity. "Very well, Mary, thank you for asking," Rose answered maddeningly, causing Mary to expel an impatient breath. Rose could not hold on to a chuckle. "I am merely fawning with you, Mary, although it was a very good meeting. The Countess was most helpful." Lowering her voice and glancing around, Rose beckoned the maid closer and recounted what Lady Yorkley had had to say about Broderick. At the conclusion, Mary's eyes were wide with concern. "What are you going to do about all this, miss? Surely you're going to have to go to his lordship, your father?" "I wish I could, Mary, but I still fear that he will have difficulty being reasonable about this, especially as the Duke is still involved. And just this morning, my mother was mentioning that Papa has to go away again, this time to Paris. They were wondering whether or not Mamma and I ought to join him, but they decided it is too important for me to continue with my first season." At this last bit, Rose could not help the tone of disgust that crept into her voice, and the roll of her eyes that accompanied her words. "Can you believe I shall be missing out on Paris, Mary?" "But do you not think it is wise, miss? For one thing, the season is important for one such as yourself, and for another, if you cannot confide in your father, then you have to sort this situation with Broderick out yourself." "You are quite right, Mary, but I still wish I could go. Mayhap, from what we have learned about Broderick, he will be going to Paris as well, and I could investigate him from there. Or he might be just waiting for an opportunity such as this, when many of the government gents are out of town to act on whatever nefarious plot is cooked up." Now it was Rose's turn to have widened eyes. She gazed at her maid with concern. "You have such a good point there, Mary. You are quite correct. I certainly must be vigilant. It is a good thing I have already arranged to meet with Wrentham. I so wish I had stuck with the Duke's suggestion of meeting tomorrow instead of the day after," she mused, staring off into the near distance. "Do you think it would be remarked upon if I were to be seen speaking to him in public? If we were to find ourselves at the same entertainments this evening, do you think I could talk to him without my mother catching wind of it?" Mary looked at her mistress with worry clearly etched in her face. "I don't rightly know, miss. Do enough people know about your family's issues for it to become an item for the gossips if it was noticed? Because if it is, your mamma is sure to find out." "Oh, you are quite correct, as usual. But if an opportunity arises, I will take the chance and tell him to meet me tomorrow. I do not think I could bear to wait an entire day. Or perhaps I should send him a note." At catching sight of Mary's dubious expression, Rose answered her own unspoken question. No, of course not. None of the footmen would be able to keep that to themselves, and then I would definitely be in the suds. They say patience is a virtue, miss. Rose could not resist sticking her tongue out at her maid. You and I both know that it is not one I possess. But you are quite right. I shall have to pretend that I have some if I cannot contrive a way to speak with His Grace this evening. Rose resolved to put the matter from her mind for the time being. Now we are nearly home, and I have been gone for far longer than I had expected. It is nearly time for me to begin my preparations for the ball I am to attend this evening. I hope I have not kept you overly from your duties. She was quite contrite. Well, miss, considering most of my duties revolve around you, I'm thinking you didn't keep me from anything. Mary grinned at her mistress in a fine humour. The two girls climbed the front stairs of their own home, and the door was opened swiftly. Welcome home, miss. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity, as Rose bathed and primped in preparation for the ball. She shared a light repast with her mother before they each returned to their chambers to conclude their dressing. It had been a quiet meal with rather stilted conversation. Lady Smythe was even more distant than usual, so Rose found it difficult to engage with her. She chalked this up to her father's departure. Even before the tragedy, her mother had always hated it when her husband travelled, but since it had become almost a phobia. Rose hoped her mother would be able to cope, because she would be rather too occupied over the next few days to be able to assist her. It was one more worry to buzz around at the back of her mind, where she pushed it in order to concentrate on the upcoming evening. Looking into the mirror as Mary put the finishing touches to her hair, Rose could not help but appreciate her own reflection. She was not an arrogant girl, but she could see that her excitement had put a flattering blush into her cheeks, which was, thankfully, complimentary to the shade of her gown.